I believe there was this cabal, this Politburo, Mike Donnellan and Steve Ricchetti, as he points out, and the others, who were hiding the worst of it. I do believe that. If you read the book, you'll walk away believing that too. Doesn't mean we were in the dark, but they were actively working to cover up just how bad he had gotten and to run him again. I mean, they wanted to keep it a secret so that we would put him back in the office. And I believe, I don't have the proof yet, but I believe he was also diagnosed with a terminal illness, and they hid that from us too.
Yeah, I don't think anybody could possibly believe at this point that it's an accident that the horrifying and truly sad cancer diagnosis was discovered, the day before this book was supposed to come out. That just beggars belief at this point. I mean, no one could truly believe
they think we're fools.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that they've gotten to this place where the lies have finally caught up with them is very significant. And I don't want to minimize what President Biden himself did in, defrauding the American people in this way, what Jill Biden did, what that inner Coterie cabal did. But I struggle, Megyn, to point to a single policy decision that Joe Biden made that I don't think a President Kamala Harris would have made, or President Gavin Newsom, or a different person would have made had he not run again and had there been an open primary. Those policies he enacted that were deeply unpopular, those are the Democratic Party's policies. And so in a way, I think this is a bit of a distraction from that. Of course, it's hugely criminal what happened here and worthy of discussing. But at the end of the day, the reason that there are people who are now willing to speak to someone like Jake Tapper is because they're hoping we won't realize the bigger problem here.
Mm-hmm. The news I referenced on Hakeem Jeffries, he's out there now, the Democrats' leader in the House, saying it's completely inappropriate, entirely inappropriate for Republicans to be discussing these, quote, conspiracy theories around Joe Biden and his cancer diagnosis in connection now with these books and, given the news that he has cancer. This is totally inappropriate. These are conspiracy theories. That guy knew. He knew. And the book points out, here's just one example from chapter 11, now that we're at liberty to discuss the contents of the book. There was a meeting with President Biden on Ukraine and House and Senate Democrats and some GOPers January 17th, 2024. And let's see, hold on. Let's see. He stumbled over words. He started sentences, then stopped abruptly. He trailed off. Months later, when the Wall Street Journal reporters began hearing that the official readout of what happened at the meeting did not reflect reality, the Biden White House circled the wagons and enlisted allies to push the narrative that in the meeting, Biden was, quote, incredibly strong, forceful, and decisive, as leader Hakeem Jeffries insisted. After reading Jeffries' quote, a House Democrat who had been at the meeting responded, quote, that's not true. A second House Democrat who was also there, quote, it was a disaster. It was a shit show. One unnamed senior administration official, I can just never forgive this guy. Now this guy's running out there trying to tell us to shut up and stop talking about any of this, including the cancer diagnosis, or we're conspiratorial ghouls.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is insanity, right? It's good to know what happened. It's good to know who lied and who is still lying and who is still carrying water for Joe Biden. But to me, Megyn, the people who are now willing to come out against Joe Biden, kind of like George Clooney, who, when this became undeniable to the American people, only then was he willing to admit what the rest of America had already seen with their own eyes. Those people who are now coming out against Joe Biden, now that he has no power, like, to me, there's something about that is also deeply disturbing, because, of course, the reason they're doing it now is it's a power grab, right? They want power back. Jake Tapper wants us now to trust him again on his show because he's willing to talk about somebody who can no longer hurt him for telling the truth about him, right? Biden is down and out. He has cancer. He is no longer a threat to anybody in power in the Democratic Party. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about what went down there. But what it does mean is the people speaking the loudest now about everything that happened, ask yourselves why they're willing to do that now. And it's because they're trying to get trust back from the American people by now telling the truth about someone who can no longer hurt them for doing so. But they will never reevaluate, for example, how they talk about Donald Trump. And that is very upsetting because, of course, the people who don't want to talk in this negative way constantly about Donald Trump are the people who knew the truth about Joe Biden and were willing to admit it then.
who could see it and had no problem admitting it. They could see it too, but they did have a problem admitting it. I do want to tell you this one thing. On the George Clooney delay from between the time he saw and infirmed Biden at that fundraiser and then not publishing that op-ed in the New York Times until weeks later, nearly a month later, they write that George had compartmentalized his encounter with the president at that LA fundraiser, chalking it up to the president's 81 spins around the sun and the long fucking trip from Italy. This is obviously straight from Clooney. That's my own speculation, even if Biden had flown in on Air Force One. But then the debate had confirmed all the fears he had shoved aside, those that he had compartmentalized, Batya. And yet the compartment opened up and the compartments began speaking to one another, and then George Clooney to the rescue with his op-ed in July. It's amazing.
I mean, Clooney really emerges from this as one of the chief villains, along with President Obama. He knew and didn't tell until everybody else knew. That moment where George Clooney, we assume, or somebody told, Tapper and Thompson that George Clooney had not recognized Joe Biden at the fundraiser. And then, of course, on Mark Halpern's show, as you pointed out, there was another version of that story told. It's possible that both versions are true, Megyn, because it's possible that what happened is George Clooney just did not get the reception that he felt he was owed and interpreted that as Joe Biden not recognizing who he was, right? The absolute arrogance here that he should be the one to decide the future of the Democratic Party, him attempting to get credit for basically stabbing Biden in the back after he could no longer hide what he had access to, what he knew because he was so wealthy and such an elite. I mean, this to me really was the cherry on the cake here. And him now, again, trying to launder his reputation for what purpose? To get power back. That's what this whole story is about.
Clooney knows he's vulnerable. That's my belief. Is he definitely talked to Tapper. Tapper interviewed him about his show on Broadway. And so we know that they've spoken. And I don't know that they've spoken about this, but it certainly seems like they have. And I feel like we've now been given George's defense to not coming out. I compartmentalized it. It was like hidden trauma. Maybe he did some like psychedelics that brought out the trauma of what happened at that fundraiser. Oh, no, wait, it was the debate that ruined his electoral chances. There was no worse actor, whatever your feelings about Tapper, no worse actor in covering up the Biden dementia than Joe Scarborough. Number one, there were plenty of people at CNN, Oliver Darcy, Brian Stelter, Chris Cillizza. Believe me, I've been neck deep in all of their sins in preparation for this interview. But Scarborough blew them all out of the water with this is the best Joe Biden ever. Roll the tape. Well, guess what? He went on Mark Halpern's show. Next up, part of the MK Media Network. It drops later today. We have a sneak preview for you of Mark pressing him on this issue. This is fun. Watch.
But looking back at that, do you say, well, it was misleading to say best Biden ever without caveating it and say, except on the days when he's not the best Biden ever?
Well, but I never saw those days personally.
Well, you did because you saw him address a dead congresswoman, and you saw him in South Carolina.
A dead congresswoman, yeah.
Yeah, well, more than that. I can show you. I can show you the RNC clip reels. There were plenty of days in public when he was not the best Biden ever, and of course, shortly after, he stumbled and bumbled around. Mark, I mean, he certainly did. Donald Trump did. Other politicians did. Based on what I saw with Biden, based on the time that I spent with Biden, based on the hundreds of hours that I talked to people who talked to Biden and people that worked with Biden. And were with him day in and day out, good friends that I know that I trusted before Biden was president, that I trust now that Biden's not president. I mean, put in the proper context, I'm just not going to freak out and melt down on one or two clips here or there.
That's a lie. Every word of that is a lie. And he's still lying, Batya.
I think the thing that is most important to keep in mind is that none of this would have been possible if we had a functioning media that had respect for the American people. It is their utter contempt for anyone who doesn't vote for their chosen people that allowed this to happen. Because as you pointed out, Megyn, again and again, you had this story. You were showing the clips. Anybody listening to your program or any conservative media was exposed to this, so much so that even Democratic voters understood that he was too old. And it is their utter contempt for Republicans, for people who vote for Trump, for working class people, for the normies of this country who are looking at this, looking at the footage and saying, this is not okay, that allowed this to happen. And so what I want to know is, what are you in the media going to do to correct the character defect that has allowed you to think you are so much better and so much more important than average working class Americans, that you can tell them not to believe what they're seeing with their own eyes? And of course, Megyn, this all has to do with the class divide and the fact that journalists are part of the elites, that the vast majority of American journalists are in the top 10%. These are people who have degrees from elite institutions, which actually make them much worse at their job because they think they are so much smarter and so much better and so much more educated than average people. The people telling the great American story absolutely hate the American people. That is the only way you end up in a situation like this, Megyn.
Well, this gets to really the heart of the issue, because I don't forgive any one of those Biden aides for covering this story up and lying and misleading. But I'm also not shocked. I mean, politicians lie. The circles around them lie. It's happened since the dawn of time. But it is the press's job to try to expose those lies. It is our reason for being to press those who are in power to get to the truth. And the more blowback you get, the more you generally know you're right over the target. And the book actually has a story of some unnamed female reporter who got her cage rattled pretty significantly by the White House as she was about to come out with an article on the mental acuity. Alex Thompson got brushed back from the White House too. There's a story about the James Rosen moment at that presser where Biden showed up at the White House briefing room and James asked him directly, people don't believe you can do this job, with respect. What are they getting wrong? And how Jill Biden freaked out after it and yelled at the staff. Why didn't somebody stop him? Why didn't somebody interrupt? Like they were going to try to interrupt the reporter in the middle of his question. Ridiculous. So whatever, that's what they do. But the press's job is to test these claims and to make sure we're not being spun and that we're not part of the lying conspiracy. Watergate was a group of officials lying to us, doing bad things, and then lying to us about what they did. And the reason we know that it happened is because you had a press corps that wanted to investigate Republicans and did. But we're just missing part two right now, at least in the so-called legacy press. And that's why people are having such a difficult time with his book, at least insofar as Jake is one of the authors, because they're like, you can't investigate yourself. And the book, without the chapter that has his mea culpa, isn't persuasive to people. This July, speaking of resets, there's a global summit of BRICS nations in Rio. This bloc of emerging superpowers, including China, Russia, India, and Iran, are meeting with the goal of displacing the US dollar as the global currency. They're calling this the Rio Reset. As BRICS nations push forward with their plans, some worry global demand for US dollars will decrease, bringing down the value of dollars in your savings. While this transition will not happen overnight, the Rio Reset could mark a pivotal moment. So learn if diversifying your savings into gold is right for you. Birch Gold Group can help you move your hard-earned savings into a tax-sheltered IRA in precious metals. Claim your free info kit on gold by texting MK to the number 989898. With an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, let Birch Gold arm you with a free, no-obligation info kit on owning gold before July and the Rio Reset. Text MK to 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.